There are moments in life when your heart is heavy, your bills are loud, and your faith feels like it's being tested on every side. You pray, you work, you believe, but the numbers still don't add up. In those moments, heaven is not silent. God has already placed a powerful weapon in your mouth. Your words are not empty sounds. They are containers of authority. What you say consistently will eventually demand a response. Faith was never meant to be quiet. Faith speaks. Faith commands. Faith declares what God has said, even when the bank statement argues back. You were not created to beg money, fear money, or bow to lack. You were created to rule by believing and speaking. When you open your mouth in alignment with God's word, circumstances must adjust. Finances must respond. Doors must open. Stop rehearsing the problem and start announcing the promise. Every time you repeat what you see, you strengthen the chains of limitation. But every time you speak what God has said, you loosen those chains. The bank may say insufficient, but heaven says more than enough. The report may say delayed, but faith says now. Your voice is not weak. It is backed by divine authority. Don't speak once and quit. Don't declare today and doubt tomorrow. Speak again. Speak until fear leaves. Speak until peace arrives. Speak until provision manifests. The obedience of your circumstances is connected to the consistency of your confession. When faith-filled words are released daily, resistance cannot last forever. God is not moved by need, he is moved by faith. And faith always has a voice. So lift your head, straighten your shoulders, open your mouth with confidence. Speak to lack, speak to debt, speak to delay, and keep speaking until it obeys. There is a sacred power resting on your voice that many believers never fully awaken to. When God formed humanity, he did not merely give breath, he imparted authority. Your voice was designed to be an instrument of agreement with heaven. Words are not just expressions of emotion or thought, they are spiritual releases. When spoken in faith, they carry weight in both the natural and unseen realms. Heaven responds to words aligned with truth, and the earth is shaped by them. Silence may feel safe, but it never changes outcomes. Fear may pressure you to whisper, but faith invites you to speak. The authority on your voice does not come from volume, education, or position. It comes from alignment with God's word. When you speak what God has already declared, you are not begging, you are enforcing. Heaven stands behind declarations that agree with its will. Angels move at the sound of faithful words. Circumstances begin to shift, not because of emotion, but because authority has been exercised. Your mouth was never meant to be passive in crisis. It was designed to be active, intentional, and confident, carrying divine backing into earthly situations. From the beginning, creation itself responded to spoken words. Light appeared because words were released. Order replaced chaos because something was spoken into emptiness. That same pattern remains active today. Faith is never silent because authority is never mute. What you speak repeatedly becomes what you empower. When you say what fear says, fear gains strength. When you say what doubt says, doubt gains ground. But when you say what God says, heaven moves to confirm it. Authority does not require visible evidence to function. It operates on assignment, not appearance. Your words are assignments sent into the atmosphere. They go ahead of you, preparing paths, confronting resistance, and demanding alignment. Even when nothing changes immediately, something is happening. Authority works invisibly before it manifests visibly. Many give up because they are listening to circumstances instead of commanding them. But faith does not wait for permission from reality. It speaks first. Your voice was designed to initiate change, not react to pressure. Authority is exercised, not felt. There will be days when your voice trembles, when emotions disagree with what you're declaring, yet authority does not dissolve because of feelings. A judge's ruling stands whether the courtroom is loud or quiet. In the same way, faith-filled words stand even when emotions waver. When you speak truth in the face of contradiction, you are not lying, you are legislating. Heaven honors that courage. The enemy understands authority, which is why resistance often increases after you speak. Resistance is not proof of failure. It is evidence that something heard you. Words spoken in faith challenge systems that were never meant to dominate you. They confront cycles of lack, delay, and limitation. Authority does not negotiate with opposition. It commands it. Each declaration strengthens your spiritual posture. Each confession retrains your mind and reorders your environment. Over time, what once resisted begins to yield, not because it wanted to, but because it had to. Your voice becomes stronger the more you use it in alignment with truth. Spiritual authority grows through obedience and consistency. Speaking once introduces authority. Speaking consistently establishes it. This is why repetition matters, not because God is hard of hearing, but because the world is resistant to change. Every declaration reinforces a spiritual position. When you speak daily, you are building a wall of agreement around your life. That wall does not collapse easily. Faith-filled words create atmosphere, and atmosphere determines outcomes. Homes change when words change. Finances shift when declarations shift. Peace replaces anxiety when truth is spoken repeatedly. Your voice trains your heart before it changes your circumstances. It aligns your inner world with heaven so your outer world can follow. Authority flows best through a heart that believes what it speaks. Over time, confidence replaces hesitation and boldness replaces fear, not because problems disappeared, but because authority was recognized. There is a moment when speaking becomes natural, when silence feels unnatural. That is when authority has been embraced. You stop reacting and start declaring. You stop explaining the problem and start announcing the promise. Your words become steady, not desperate. Calm, not frantic. Authority is never rushed. It speaks with certainty, not urgency. When your voice carries heaven's authority, you no longer need to shout at circumstances. You simply speak. The power is not in intensity, but in alignment. Heaven listens for agreement, not volume. Each time you speak truth, you remind the atmosphere who is in charge. Your voice becomes a reminder that you are not alone, not powerless, not forgotten. Authority does not need applause to function. It only needs permission to be released through your mouth. Faith is not a silent belief hidden in the heart. It is a living force that responds to expression. What remains unspoken often remains unactivated. Confession is the ignition that turns belief into movement. When faith is spoken, it steps out of theory and into action. Many believe privately, but speak publicly in contradiction, canceling the power of what they say they believe. Consistent confession is not about repetition without meaning. It is about alignment without interruption. Every time you speak in agreement with God's word, faith receives permission to operate. Words give faith a pathway to travel. Without confession, faith stays dormant, waiting. The mouth becomes the doorway through which faith enters the natural realm. Speaking once introduces faith, but speaking continually establishes it. Confession keeps faith alive during waiting seasons, protecting it from doubt, fear, and discouragement. When you speak consistently, you are reminding your own heart what it has chosen to believe. Faith grows stronger not by silence, but by repeated agreement with truth. Consistency is what separates momentary inspiration from lasting manifestation. Many speak in emotional moments but grow quiet when resistance appears. Yet faith is sustained through discipline, not emotion. Confession is the daily practice of declaring what God has said, regardless of what is seen. When you stop speaking, you stop enforcing. Circumstances do not change simply because truth exists. They change when truth is declared. Each confession is a spiritual action that reinforces authority. Even when results are delayed, confession is working beneath the surface. Faith does not demand immediate evidence to continue speaking. It trusts that words released in alignment are already producing movement. Inconsistent confession creates gaps where doubt can enter, but steady confession builds momentum. Over time, the heart begins to fully accept what the mouth has been declaring. Fear loses its grip because it is no longer being fed. Peace increases because truth is being rehearsed. Consistent confession trains the mind to expect God's word to prevail. What you confess repeatedly shapes your inner landscape. The heart eventually believes what the mouth consistently declares. This is why confession is not only for circumstances, but for transformation. When you speak faith, you are renewing your mind and strengthening your spiritual posture. Confession confronts negative thought patterns and replaces them with divine perspective. Many struggles persist not because faith is absent, but because confession has been inconsistent. The mind listens to the voice it hears the most. If fear speaks louder than faith, fear dominates. But when faith speaks daily, it becomes familiar, trusted, and authoritative. Confession is how faith takes root deeply enough to withstand pressure. Over time, doubt loses credibility. Anxiety loses influence. Confidence grows quietly but firmly. Faith becomes less reactive and more assured. The heart stops questioning and starts resting. This internal shift prepares the way for external change, because the inner world must align before the outer world responds. Consistent confession also resists the pressure of contradiction. Life will often argue against what you're declaring. Symptoms may persist, bills may remain, delays may continue. But confession is not a response to conditions. It is a declaration of truth. Faith does not wait for permission from circumstances to speak. It speaks to establish order. Every declaration pushes back against resistance. The unseen realm responds first, even when the natural appears unchanged. Faith understands that words released today may manifest later. Consistency keeps faith active during that interval. When confession stops, doubt tries to take over the conversation. But when confession continues, doubt is silenced. The atmosphere shifts gradually, then suddenly. What once felt heavy begins to feel lighter. Obstacles begin to lose strength. This is not coincidence. It is the result of sustained spiritual pressure applied through confession. Faith stays engaged by speaking, not by observing. Confession is not about convincing God. It is about positioning yourself. God's word is already settled, but faith must agree with it continuously. When you speak consistently, you are choosing alignment over appearance. Each declaration is a reaffirmation of trust. Faith matures through repetition, becoming stable and unshakable. Over time, your language changes naturally. Complaints decrease. Gratitude increases. Confidence replaces hesitation. This is evidence that faith is fully activated. Confession keeps faith alert, expectant, and ready to receive. It anchors belief during storms and sustains hope during waiting. What you say daily becomes what you stand on confidently. Faith does not grow tired of speaking truth. It grows stronger with every confession that refuses to bow to contradiction. Lack gains its greatest strength not from circumstances but from agreement. The moment you speak what you fear, you give that fear permission to settle in your life. Words of shortage, limitation, and despair may feel honest, but they quietly become contracts that reinforce what you don't want. Agreement is powerful because it establishes alignment. When you agree with lack, you align your thoughts, expectations, and emotions with insufficiency. Faith, however, calls for a different alignment. Declaring supply is not denial of reality, it is a declaration of a higher truth. What God has provided exists before it appears. When you speak supply, you position yourself to receive it. Every declaration of abundance challenges the narrative of shortage. Even if the evidence is not visible, agreement with supply begins to shift your internal posture. The heart starts expecting provision instead of preparing for disappointment. Lack thrives where it is spoken repeatedly, but it weakens where it is confronted by consistent declarations of provision. Many unknowingly strengthen lack by rehearsing it daily. Conversations become confessions, and confessions become beliefs. Statements like, "I never have enough," or "things are getting worse," may sound harmless, but they shape expectation. Faith is not strengthened by realism, it is strengthened by truth. Declaring supply interrupts cycles that have existed for years. It replaces resignation with anticipation. When you stop agreeing with lack, you stop feeding it emotional and spiritual energy. Declaring supply does not mean ignoring wisdom or responsibility. It means refusing to let shortage define you. Your words are seeds. Seeds spoken in fear produce anxiety, but seeds spoken in faith produce confidence. Over time, your environment begins to reflect the language you consistently use. Hope replaces heaviness. Expectation replaces dread. The shift begins internally, but it does not stay there. Agreement with supply invites creative solutions, favor, and opportunities that were previously overlooked. Declaring supply also retrains how you see resources. Lack focuses on what is missing. Faith focuses on what is available. When you speak supply, you begin to recognize provision that was already present but unacknowledged. Faith sharpens perception. What once looked insufficient begins to look usable. Small beginnings gain value. Declaring supply invites gratitude, and gratitude multiplies awareness. Many breakthroughs begin when language changes. The moment you stop describing what you don't have and start declaring what is promised, your perspective expands. Supply is not always immediate cash or material provision. Sometimes it is wisdom, timing, or connection. Declaring supply keeps your heart open to all forms of provision. It prevents desperation from narrowing your vision. Faith speaks before it sees because it trusts that provision exists beyond current visibility. That trust creates peace, and peace creates clarity. Resistance often intensifies when you stop agreeing with lack. Old patterns resist being replaced. Familiar struggles protest when they are challenged. This is why consistency matters. Declaring supply once introduces a new direction, but declaring it repeatedly establishes it. Each declaration weakens the voice of scarcity. Over time, fear loses authority. Anxiety stops dominating decisions. Confidence grows quietly. Declaring supply does not require emotional excitement, it requires commitment. Even on days when provision feels distant, faith continues speaking. That persistence creates spiritual pressure. What was once accepted as normal shortage begins to feel unacceptable. Faith raises the standard of expectation. Declaring supply becomes a form of resistance against despair. It keeps hope alive when evidence is delayed. This discipline of language sustains faith during seasons of waiting. When you consistently declare supply, your heart stops bracing for loss and starts preparing for increase. This shift affects choices, actions, and attitudes. You begin to plan with hope instead of caution rooted in fear. Declaring supply aligns you with God's nature, which is generous, abundant, and faithful. Lack is temporary, but truth is constant. Your agreement determines which one dominates your thinking. Each declaration is a reminder that provision is not earned by anxiety, but received by faith. Declaring supply builds resilience. It keeps your spirit steady even when circumstances fluctuate. Over time, the voice of faith becomes louder than the voice of fear. What you agree with shapes what you experience. When supply is consistently declared, lack loses its power to define your story. Faith was never designed to be passive or silent. It was designed to speak with authority. Circumstances may appear solid and unchangeable, but they are not immune to a faithful voice. The moment faith speaks, it challenges the current order of things. Silence allows situations to continue unchecked, but declaration confronts them. Faith does not ask circumstances how strong they are. It tells them who is in charge. When truth is spoken, it introduces a higher law that overrides natural limitations. Circumstances respond not to emotion, but to authority. A calm, confident declaration carries more power than frantic effort. Faith speaks because it knows it has the right to. When you release words aligned with truth, you're not describing your situation, you are directing it. The voice of faith does not echo fear or uncertainty. It announces expectation. Even when nothing changes immediately, something has been set in motion. Circumstances begin to adjust because they have been confronted by a voice they recognize. Every circumstance is influenced by the atmosphere surrounding it. Faith-filled words change atmosphere before they change outcomes. When fear dominates speech, pressure increases. When faith dominates speech, peace enters. Circumstances thrive on agreement. If they go unchallenged, they remain. But when faith speaks consistently, it disrupts their authority. Words released in faith carry spiritual force that reaches beyond what the eyes can see. Resistance is often a sign that faith has been heard. Opposition rises when something is being challenged. This does not mean faith has failed. It means faith is working. Circumstances may resist at first, but resistance does not equal permanence. Faith continues speaking because it understands process. Each declaration applies pressure. Over time, what resisted begins to weaken. The atmosphere shifts gradually, preparing the way for visible change. Faith speaks from conviction, not from desperation. Desperation pleads, faith commands. The difference is posture. When you know your authority, your words become steady and assured. Circumstances recognize that tone. Faith does not shout to be heard. It speaks because it expects obedience. This confidence is built through consistency. The more faith is exercised, the stronger it becomes. Speaking once introduces authority, but speaking continually establishes it. Circumstances often test persistence. They wait to see if faith will retreat. When faith continues speaking despite delay, it demonstrates confidence in truth rather than in timing. This endurance strengthens authority. Over time, circumstances lose their ability to intimidate. What once felt overwhelming becomes manageable. Faith reshapes perception even before it reshapes reality. Many situations remain unchanged not because they cannot change, but because they have not been addressed by faith. Silence is often mistaken for patience, but patience does not require quietness. Faithful patience continues speaking while waiting. Circumstances respond when they are consistently confronted by truth. Faith does not wait for conditions to improve before speaking. It speaks to initiate improvement. Each declaration reasserts authority. Each confession reminds circumstances that they are temporary. Even long-standing situations respond when faith refuses to stop speaking. Time does not weaken faith. Inconsistency does. When faith speaks daily, it builds spiritual momentum. That momentum eventually breaks resistance. What once seemed permanent begins to shift. This process may be unseen, but it is active. When faith becomes your first response instead of your last option, circumstances begin to change more readily. Your voice sets the tone for your environment. Faithful words establish expectation, and expectation shapes outcome. Circumstances are not impressed by logic, but they yield to authority. Authority is released through the mouth. When you consistently speak truth, you create an environment where obedience becomes inevitable. Faith does not negotiate with fear or delay. It speaks with clarity and assurance. Over time, the voice of faith becomes dominant. Circumstances adjust, not because they want to, but because they must respond to the authority behind the words spoken. As we bring this message to a close, remember this truth deep in your heart. Faith was never meant to stay hidden inside you. It was designed to be released through your words. Everything you have heard points to one powerful reality. Your voice matters. What you consistently speak shapes what you eventually experience. When you align your words with truth, you invite heaven's authority into earthly situations. Silence allows pressure to remain, but faithful speech confronts it. Each declaration you make in belief becomes a step toward change. Even when results are not immediately visible, you are not powerless in the face of lack, delay, or opposition. Agreement determines direction. When you stop agreeing with fear and start declaring provision, you break old patterns and establish new expectations. Faith grows stronger every time it is spoken. Consistent confession keeps hope alive, steadies your heart, and trains your mind to expect God's supply rather than prepare for defeat. Over time, what once felt overwhelming begins to lose its grip, because circumstances cannot maintain authority where faith is consistently exercised. Do not underestimate the impact of persistence. Faith does not quit because results are delayed. It speaks again and again and again until peace replaces anxiety and confidence replaces fear. Your words create atmosphere, and atmosphere influences outcomes. When faith becomes your daily language, your environment begins to resist it, start to shift, not because they wanted to, but because they were confronted by unwavering belief. Carry this message with you. Let your mouth become a tool of faith rather than a mirror of circumstances. Speak truth, declare supply, enforce authority, and trust that what you release in faith will return with results at the right time. Thank you for listening. May God bless you richly. Stay strong in faith and walk boldly in victory.